What's on the silver screen? I got some takes you wouldn't believe. Hello and welcome to Popmosis Film, the film podcast. So a few episodes ago, I mentioned that we were the only film podcast. Since then, I've done some research. Turns out there are quite a few other ones.
Wait, I thought you were joking.
I thought we were.
Yeah, I thought you were being sarcastic.
Yeah, me too.
Being sarcastic. That's what I was saying.
I've never been sarcastic. Ask my wife.
Oh.
Wait, I'm so confused. Wait, are you serious?
I don't know anymore.
Oh my God, there's like 500 movie podcasts. I would say most podcasts have to do something about movies.
And yes, Tyler, I am very much being sarcastic.
Oh, thank God. I can't tell. Oh my
Or
God.
I'm very, 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 very uninformed. And
Maybe
but we all do. We all
last-
do live in
last
caves
movie
right
podcast.
now. Yes, the last movie podcast. Or the first. We're neither. We're somewhere in between. So this is Popmosis Film, and we are one of many film podcasts. But the cool thing about this film podcast is we have with us, as always, myself, Josiah. I'm a writer. That's the perspective I bring. And we have...
I'm Paul. I'm just a movie fan. I love the movies and love to talk about movies. That's pretty much it.
And this is Tyler, who was a critic for many years, and now I just run GGG, and we don't review anymore because screw that life.
And so today we are very excited. This is a little bit different from we've just done a few episodes, but our format is really just to break down and analyze a film, why we love it or why we want to love it but can't love it because it hates us, such as the Green Lantern, which we were talking about before we even started this podcast, even though we recorded that weeks ago.
I talk about Green Lantern at least 3 times a week, mostly with my mom, and then she's just like, Who is this? What? Just kidding.
My mom might at least remember the action figures that I had of Green
Do
Lantern.
I know their mother? Like, who is this?
Yeah, she thinks Green Lantern's like your childhood friend.
Isn't he the superhero they always make fun of on Robot Chicken? Or
That one.
Aquaman? Or maybe both of them.
So we are happy to have with us the voice you can hear there of Sam Koji Hale, because we are going to talk about his feature film, Yamasong, March of the Hollows, and we're going to go back in time in history to where I first met Sam, and we're going to first talk, before we talk about that feature, the short film Yamasong, which was a short released in 2009, Sam?
2010.
So 2010. Oh yeah, that's when I screened it for my film festival. So that's when I found it. Okay, so that was I was right on the ball when I found it.
We get it. You're better than us, Josiah. Just kidding.
I'm just ahead of you guys slightly. That's the one thing I've ever been ahead of the curve on anything on. Everything else I'm well behind it. So.
What were you saying, Sam?
Oh, I just said it was released in 2010. I think Josiah's Film Festival might have been the second or third one that we were in. I think the first one was Florida Film Festival, and I think maybe after that. It was pretty early on, though.
Yeah, so so just a quick, before we're going to have plenty of questions for Sam, just the context of how I discovered the short film version that eventually became a feature. So in 2009, 2010, it was actually 2010 with my friend Andrew McGregor. We formed a film festival, which the bent on the film was short films that could become comic books, right? Because a lot of shorts are pitches for features, and we're talking about a short that became a feature. And that was kind of what we saw, that we could help these shorts become comic books that could then maybe accelerate them to getting made into features. That never panned out the way we wanted to. We got distracted by things, and so we kind of went in a 50 million different directions, but that was the original intention of what we had. And so with that, one of the things we wanted to do was, with the film festival, was give an award in honor of Jim Henson, right? So what I did was we created an award. We had this idea, and I reached out to the Henson Company. And we also did the same thing for Jack Kirby, which I'll kind of throw in there. The Hensons replied to me. I randomly emailed them, and they were like, that's so sweet of you, but don't do that. You're not allowed to do that. We want to save that in case we want to do that. But what they did was they then connected me with Heather, one of Jim's daughters. So I think I was talking to Lisa. She was the one that was from the Henson, that was at the Henson Company, that was emailing me. And so Lisa said, talk to Heather. She's like the indie puppet person. She has a bunch of films and things that would be right up your alley. And at the same time, I'm connecting with her. Andrew is trying to get me to watch this short puppet film that he discovered, and he's like, "You got to watch this. It's awesome. You got to watch this film." So I'm connecting with Heather. Heather then tells me about one of her films that she wants to screen. It's one of the newer ones at that point in time for the festival, which is Yama-san, which it turns out is the same exact film that Andrew was telling me to watch. So I have it coming at me from both ways, and then that's how we got connected. We did some events with Sam at the Hive Gallery in downtown LA, which were the small sort of intimate events, which were really cool. And then Sam was featured as part of one of the filmmakers when we did our big event at the Downtown Independent, our first big theater event. And that was in January of 2011. So almost a decade ago when we did our sort of big Graph-Nation extravaganza, Sam. So tell us a little bit, Sam, about the genesis of the short film.
Yeah, so I'd known Heather for a number of years because I've been involved in puppet stuff for a while since I lived in the Bay Area where I went to art school, and I met her when she was traveling through San Francisco doing her first live show, and we just stayed in touch. And so then when I moved to LA, at some point I was talking to I did a show in Little Tokyo that was basically a Japanese folktale about a father whose son dies and the father has to go with a magic fox into the underworld and fight a demon and then bring the son's spirit back. And that was a live show we did, and Heather heard about it, and she was in LA going to Cal Arts. So I got together with her and we were talking, and I was like, I have another idea I'd like to pitch. It's called Yama-Song. It's based on music by these musicians that I met who came to see the live show and loved the live performance with puppets, and was like, let's collaborate. So I pitched to Heather, and then she's like, yeah, let's do it. And so started talking to the band, started working on the script based on, ideas that came to me from this song that was originally written that was about climbing to the top of a mountain, which I didn't know at the time. But when I heard the music, I was like, I have these images of characters climbing to the top of a mountain. So, so Heather said, yeah, let's do it. And she funded it. And then we, dove right into making the short film, which I think was like her 5th or 6th short film that she funded at the time. So that's the basic idea of it. And I was doing the puppet show I did in Little Tokyo was the first time I did something more along the lines of a bunraku style, which is a Japanese style where you have 3 puppeteers performing one character. And, when you do it live, you're dressed in black, so you just kind of disappear against the dark background. But for film, we shot on green screen and then keyed out the performers and, did all of the rod and rig removal and all that, and then put them into digital, futuristic or sci-fi-ish type backgrounds. And that we shot at Kyoto Brothers Productions. They're the Killer Clowns guys, the guys that did all the puppets for Team America. So
awesome.
I worked there for a number of years. Yeah. And they're great nurturers, and they've been there for years, helping artists to create new works. So I was funded by Heather Henson, and we built and shot the show at the Kyoto Brothers.
How long was production for the short, at least? Because the short is about 8.5 minutes long. So
yeah.
So with that, with puppetry, with pre-production and everything, I mean, how long was essentially the entire project from creating it?
Yeah, the films, the film she funds, it's a small stipend to basically fund the low budget film, and we have a year to turn it around. So I was working at the time part-time at Barnes and Noble, so when I was on my lunch break and coffee break, I was storyboarding every moment I had, because I knew that at some point I was going to take out a chunk of a week off or 2 weeks and go in and finish the build and shoot. So we shot over 2 weekends. The puppet build itself was probably 2 or 3 months, and
wow,
it was me and maybe a half a dozen other people working at Kyoto Brothers, who let us come in and rent some space, and it was really cool. Oh, and Stephen Kyoto, the brother who teaches at Cal Arts, he actually sculpted the head of the turtle character Shojin.
Oh, that's a great puppet. Oh wait, so how long does each puppet? You said 2 months for just one, or for you have there are 3 characters in the short, and then you have the those rock floating creatures.
Yeah.
So, which one was the hardest one to create?
It was probably the first one because it was the mechanical bird that the characters ride on.
Yeah.
Because it was we were figuring it out as we were going. So that one was the most R&D. And then once we had that, then we started building the more humanoid characters, and those were easier.
Yeah.
So yeah, and it really depends on how many people you have working at the same time on each puppet. I ballpark it now usually at about 3 weeks a puppet usually is what it takes.
Nice.
With the crews I have. Yeah.
And just going back to that bird, the mechanical bird, it's the one, Sam, that runs right across like the plane. Yeah, that was also like Sam will know this, that was the clip that when I had my film festival trailer, we had like little clips of all the shorts from the festival. And that was always the one where people were like, oh, what's that? So that was always that grabby one. And kind of going back to what you talked about with the visual effects, what grabbed me about the short, which is what you see in the feature, which is the most beautiful thing about it, is which now you see, it's now common, and you see the Dark Crystal show and all those things where you have these, it's digital compositing, right? In the original Dark Crystal, they're painting maps and all that stuff. And now it's just this digital world. So you can take that tactile puppet, that real thing that you can connect with emotionally differently, like Yoda versus digital Yoda. It's just different. They're both fake, but one is actually real, if that makes sense. And but bringing in sort of those digital elements to create a world around it that's believable. And that was for me, legitimately, when I saw Sam's short, Yamasong, that was the first time I'd seen that with puppets. You'd seen it in maybe some live action things and other things to put people in another world, but with puppets, that was, I honestly, like for me, and I shared it with Sam, like that was groundbreaking. Like everything else you could throw away, it's like, oh my gosh, this is like a new way of doing this that makes it unique. And plus, obviously, you saw it then the next level in a massive scale with even your feature in the Dark Crystals, the series, with all the, you can, now the puppeteers, everybody's in a green screen suit. So
yeah, it's interesting looking back. That was 10 years ago now. It was actually one of the first short films also shot on a Canon 7D. My DP had just bought it, and he wanted to use that to break it in with Yamasong.
That's so funny. I have the exact same camera. That's how we shoot all of our stuff.
Yeah. Well, that was like one of the first times that I'm aware of anyway. But yeah, what Josiah's saying is true. We have other short films that we worked on, and I worked with a lot of other puppet filmmakers. And there was one other film that came out. It was basically, I think, being shot and posted around the same time as Yamasong, because Yamasong came out, and then a few months later, Moon Fishing, which is another one of Heather's short films, came out. And it's the same process, the same exact process we were using is what a filmmaker, David Michael Friend, was also using in New York. And we were both, same mindset. We're going to, we know these tools. We do After Effects. We want to combine all of these tools together in one place, live puppets, digital, and, compositing it. So, yeah, it was at the time really new and fresh and different. And it's neat to see that the Dark Crystal series really kind of built off of that. I'm not taking credit for it, of course, but it's just like, well, see, puppets, green screen, mixed sets with, real live practical elements. It's all kind of become part of the toolbox,
Absolutely. So something I'm actually very interested in asking you is, what do you think are the advantages and also like maybe the cons of creating something with puppets as opposed to stop motion? I know they're completely different processes and completely different production. They just are. But what have you found to be, the pros and cons of doing puppetry as opposed to stop motion?
Well, I over working at Kyoto Brothers, I've worked on everything from stop motion to live puppets to costume creatures. So being over there as long as I have, I've been able to touch a lot of different approaches. And, I think the classic thing that people would say, stop motion takes a long time because it's, you're animated one frame at a time or one pose for one frame or two frames. But, at the end of the day, you have seconds of footage where with live puppets, you can get more, I'd say it depends on who it is, but like with Yamasong, I think we're averaging maybe 4 to 5 minutes a day for dialogue, but any action that required, choreography and planning and all of that, it went down to like a minute and a half to 2 minutes in a day. So that's a lot more than stop motion, but it's still not a lot of footage compared to, say, live action, where you can shoot. I don't even know how many pages is average for a show. It probably depends on if it's a comedy, if
a drama or an action film. Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure that parallel that you just used, Sam, totally runs true. Where it's like, is it an action sequence? How elaborate is the action sequence versus characters talking and dialogue, which with puppets can probably bring its own complications, right? I mean,
action. This is what people in live puppets say. Every shot is a special effects shot.
Yeah,
you have to plan every shot. If it's rod puppets or bunraku, when you start moving through the sequence of the action, a puppeteer's arm might cross in front of the puppet, so then you got to reblock it so that doesn't happen. And then you bring in, once we do the rough blocking, then we bring in the lights, we light it, and suddenly a puppeteer shadow is going over your whole set.
Yeah.
So then you got to move your puppeteer, or you got to move your lights, so you're not getting that. So we're constantly adjusting and adjusting. With the Yamasong, the movie, we got into really good rhythm with the team we had. So after, I think, the first week, second week, we were getting into really great rhythm. But yeah, that's part of the challenge of shooting with puppets versus live action in general. Puppets versus stop motion. I'd say the tricky part with shooting with puppets is doing puppets in film, like I do, is still relatively new. So finding people who have the experience doing it is a little harder to recruit than stop motion, where you've got you've got so many people who've been working at Robot Chicken, or have gone through, Bix Pix and Tumbleleaf and their show, or Kyoto Brothers and their different stop motion things, or Screen Novelties. There's enough stop motion companies here, or people coming in down from Portland who worked at Leica. There's enough people out there who've worked in stop motion production that you can plug in and just, kind of go. If they know how to do it, you plug them in and you just start, where there's a little bit of a learning curve, I think, for live puppets still, because it's, I as old as puppets are, it's that this process is still relatively new,
Exactly. No, I absolutely agree. I mean, stop motion has been around, for a very, very long time. I mean, there was stop motion animation before there was actually even 2D animation way back when, even in the 1910s. Yeah. I mean, it has been around almost since the beginning of film, and which is very different from, like what you're saying, live puppetry. And I think like one thing with like live puppetry that would be like a lot better is that you can, like what you were saying, like you can do something and see, I can see the puppeteer's shadow. Like the one thing that you have an advantage of with live puppetry is you can actually rehearse a scene as opposed to the stop motion. You're just like, we worked on this for 30 days and didn't realize that light moved. Like,
oh man, I've worked in visual effects and stop motion on a lot of stop motion projects, and that's what VFX is largely about. And stop motion is like a light pops in the middle of a shot.
Yep.
So then the VFX person has to go in and then fake the light, or find a way to fix it so that it looks like it's normal. That the lighting is normal in this whole scene, or getting rid of rigs. Or I love in the stop motion world, the animators are moving and they've got their tools and stuff, and sometimes you'll have tools that they leave in the shot because they're moving so fast. So then you got to go out and rotoscope out, a drill, or shavings of wood because they've been drilling holes in the floor to move the puppet, but they didn't clean the set cleanly enough. So you got a little bit of chatter of wood bits. All that kind of stuff is really fun. It's for Yamasong and films like that. I feel like when it gets to the post stage, that we end up bringing in live action compositors more than stop motion compositors, because it's live puppets. So the puppets are constantly moving. Even if the puppet is standing still, there's a little bit of float or a little bit of jitter or shake. You try to minimize it, but there's still sometimes that. So rig removal oftentimes is down to frame by frame rig removal, where stop motion, sometimes you can get away with, if a character is locked down in the background and not moving, you might not have to do much cleanup on it at all.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of a challenge there. So it's kind of, in a way, we're kind of writing the playbook on it through the films that we do. and hopefully, I can pass that on to other people as they do those kinds of films too.
And we've talked about Henson, Jim, the Hensons and all that, and Jim Henson and puppetry. And so often, just kind of piggyback on, people think of puppetry as Muppets, as here's my arm up Elmo's butt and making him talk, and that's what we think of as puppetry a lot of the time. And this is a far more complicated version of that, where you have, and I mean, Jim Henson's obviously done all that stuff, but it's just a lot of time, I think the mind goes to that simple version, like it's Sesame Street, where, Oscar's in a trash can, that kind of thing, where it's just the more simple puppet, as opposed to this fully articulated character that, you might be watching a scene. For example, I know that one of the questions that we talked about, that shot of that mechanical bird sort of running across the landscape, that was a shot that I know every time that we did a screening, people would ask, well, was that stop motion? Was that some other kind of visual effect? Because it looked, the way it was running, it was like, well, that can't be a puppet. That's kind of how people reacted to that. I remember specifically. Right. So
yeah. I mean, the Muppet style, I think, is most conducive to verbal comedy. Characters talking to each other and jokes and gags. I think that's what it's really strongest at. One of the things that got me excited about doing more this tabletop Bunraku style is that you see the whole body. Yeah. So it's got the possibility to get into full choreography and action and all of that. I also saw in 2001 a film called Legend of the Sacred Stone. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. Mm-hmm. It's a Taiwanese martial arts film, and it's Taiwanese rod puppets. So the company that did that, it was all martial arts, and I saw that in 2001. I'm like, wow, this is really dynamic, really cool. It's not something you'll ever see with Muppets. And so that was, one of my inspirations back then. And it wasn't, it was 8 or 9 years later before I put that into practice. But yeah, so Muppets you only see usually waist up. And so, shooting some of the challenges, when you do big group shots, if you don't have something like, was it Muppets Take Manhattan, where they were in the hotel?
Yeah.
They have the big singing number. Yeah. So a big singing number. So you have Muppets on the ground level, close to camera, behind them. Then you have characters on the stairs and the characters on the second floor. So you can fill the whole frame in a wide shot. If you don't have those kinds of shots, oftentimes what you have instead is characters kind of in the lower half or lower third of your frame, and then a lot of dead space in the back.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's one of the things that happens with shooting Muppet style. You have to be creative about. And of course, Jim Henson and Frank Oz were super creative about working around those limitations.
The
advantage of the Muppet
placement
style
of puppets,
is
especially. Oops, sorry. I was saying with the placement of puppets as well, and like which characters they would utilize as well. Like it's like what those two in particular were just so good at.
Yeah. They developed a language of visual storytelling with their particular type of puppetry that people they still use. It works so well.
Yeah.
And with what we're doing with Yamasang, I hope that we're helping to figure out some of those same kinds of things so that we can keep doing stories in this style. Because I'm really into the whole. Josiah can back me up on this. The whole kind of comic book action, but in puppet form. The Jack Kirby classic. Big fights and stuff flying everywhere, and lots of dynamic, visceral action that you don't see.
Absolutely.
And really quickly, the Jack Kirby mentioned, Sam won an award named after Jack Kirby. So we went and tried to do the Henson Award. They said no. We also did a Jack Kirby Award. We reached out to them. They didn't respond. So we're like, well, let's just do it anyway. And maybe they'll send us a cease and desist or something and tell us to stop, but at least we'll get some attention for it. Literally, that was my thinking at the time. And that they never said anything, but we only gave the award out once, and we gave it to Sam, so for Yamasang. So it's kind of cool that Jack Kirby comes full circle in that way. So let's.
And Jack Kirby keeps coming up. We were chatting before we started recording about the Warner Brothers stuff, and my in with Warner Brothers was one of the development guys over there was a huge Jack Kirby fan. So the first time we met, we just talked Jack Kirby for 30 minutes before we even got to the pitch. It was great.
I want to deviate real quick because we've been talking about the short film a lot and dabbled into the actual film itself. And one thing that I'm while watching both that I loved was the fact that in the short we had a story of three characters, two free thinking characters and one bird transportation essentially character as well, and going on to a full broad world with rules, with people, with different kinds of people, and with civilizations, and then also another story of people orbiting that world as well. What were some of the things as from translating this to a short that was focused so much on the two characters connecting and and telling their story as opposed to creating this into a bigger world that actually impacts literally the entire world, multiple people that we don't even see in the film.
Yeah, when I to give you a little background on the film, I did a Kickstarter, and one of the guys who funded me was a businessman from United Arab Emirates, Sultan Saeed Al Darmaki. And Sultan came to LA and met me, and we were talking. And he's like, "I'm thinking of starting my own company, and I want to make a feature film. Do you have anything you'd like to do?" So I happened to have my iPad with me, and I gave it to Sultan to watch Yamasong. He watched it, and he goes, "Oh, this is fantastic. Let's make it." It wasn't any, haggling or, this and that kind of back and forth stuff you often hear, with contracts or whatever. It was just like, let's make it. And he funded it, It's like Heather said, let's make it. And she funded it. Where most of the time, it could take 6 months or a year or longer to hammer out the contract in detail. So once he said, let's make it, then I jumped right into thinking, okay, I'm going to take this 8-minute, 9-minute short and expand it out into 90 minutes. What do I need to put into it, or what needs to go into it? And I think the biggest thing was just saying I want to make it see the world kind of like Dark Crystal, see more of the scope of the world and expand on each of the races or cultures that are part of that world. So I already knew we had the turtle race, the Terrapins, who are kind of like samurai, but water village boat dwelling people who are fishermen. So they're kind of like a traditional Asian culture kind of thing. And then Nani, the patchwork girl, we knew that she was already, trapped in a prison moon over the planet. So it was like, okay, expand on that a little more. Why are they in the prison? What is it that forced them to be there? And what's her motivation for escaping? Because in the first one, we see her escape and go to the planet for a short time and then wind up back in the prison. It's funny because I hadn't originally thought about the prison idea, but when I showed the original short to Stephen Kyoto at the Kyoto Brothers, Stephen goes, "So why are there bars on the window in the background? Is this some kind of prison?" And it was just like an aesthetic thing at the time. I think we created windows, and the windows, we put some bars on the windows, but that got me thinking, oh yeah, it's a prison. It's definitely a prison. So why is she a prisoner?
Yeah.
So we expanded out from that, and then the third race, which are the Ovis, the ram-like people, were part of another character. The original short was supposed to have a third character that they meet, and it was going to be a ram character. And that character I cut because it was going to be more costly. It was going to take some more time, and I felt like it kind of muddled the original short story because it was stronger when it's just the two characters on their journey. So bringing a third character in is kind of adding like a third rung to a romance, or creating a love triangle instead of just two strangers meet and go on a journey together.
Yeah.
So that's when I started developing who are the Ovis and what's their relationship to the other two races. Because I did want to bring the Ovis in. I already had designs and stuff from the short film, so it was a matter of figuring that out. So I was expanding the scope and then figuring out what was the thing that connected them all together. It was the return of the Hollows, who were prisoners, and then them wanting to pick up where they left off in terms of conquering the world again and turning everybody into machines. So that was pretty much, the big step was just deciding how big to go with it and how to connect all the characters together.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
Thank you.
So that's really interesting to hear, Sam. Just knowing that, like I said, I found what came to me, the short in 2010. That's a decade ago, and it's crazy to think, but the fact that then there was the character that that was expanded in the future, that the Ovis character was already there. What, just curiosity, what role would that have played in the short? Like, would it have been a similar dynamic to the film, like sort of that?
It would have been crazy. It would have changed the whole short, because there was also another hollow character, a patchwork character. It was originally going to be Nani and a male that both end up on the world. And then but then the male, I don't remember exactly. I'd have to go back to look at my notes. Something happened to the male where he's either trapped or killed or destroyed. So then she was left there by herself. And then the Ovis was this weird kind of heavy metal type inspired creature who was riding on a big giant motorcycle that flew through the air. He was like, a Hell's Angel, but ram guy. It was nothing like what he became, but that's
Okay.
what it was. Yeah. It would have been so different. And there were flying bubbles, like bubbles that they get trapped in and float around in. And it was a little trippier. I mean, it's trippy anyway.
And you mentioned how the music, the composer on the film, Shoji, he also did the music with a band for the short. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Shoji, actually, it's the same band for both. Shoji Kameda is the leader of Own Ensemble, which is an LA-based band. You can check out their music at ownensemble.com. That's onensemble.com. And their thing is they work with traditional Western and Eastern instruments. They play taiko, they play Japanese flute, they do throat singing, like Mongolian or Tibetan throat singing type stuff, and mix that together with like guitars and modern Western instruments. And it's just super cool, the fusion, the East-West fusion sound that they have. And so they were working on an album when Shoji saw Fox Lantern, which was my Japanese folktale story, and he came up afterwards and like, let's collaborate. So he's the one who gave me the music, and then so everything, I built an animatic for Yamasong around the music. So all of the timing, everything was pretty much determined by the music and the beats of the music. When we got to the feature film, I went back to Shoji and I was like, hey man, we got a movie. You want to score the movie? And he's like, yeah, of course. I was like, okay, it has to be different this time though, because we have this big script, this world we're building, and I can't take music that you've written and try to shoehorn the story into the music. Can we do it the other way around, which is how films usually are, right? You have the picture, and then you bring in your composer, and then they compose or they score to the picture. So we kind of flipped the process for the feature, which I think was a little frustrating for Shoji at first, but I think he got into it. And then I brought in Steve Eat, who's an illustrator who also helped out on the original Yamasong. He'd moved on to like video game art, doing like concept art for video games. And so I brought him in. He did like 7 or 8 concept pieces based on just rough descriptions of what I knew was going to be in the story. And then he fleshed out these concept art pieces, and I sent those to Shoji, and then Shoji started doing his initial composing based on the visuals that he got on the concept art.
That's awesome. Paul, do you have a question?
Yeah, I was wondering how much of the movie was already developed when he did the short film, and I one thing I was kind of wondering about the short film is that the film felt like a sequel to the short film, and I thought it would be kind of neat if you kind of expanded more on the short story and kind of like merge the two together. So I was just wondering what about that.
The transition, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when I was writing the script for the feature, I had a lot of ideas already, because the gap between the finished film 2010, when we released in 2010, and then the funding for the feature was 4 years. So 2014 is when I got the funding. So in that 4 years time, I'd gone out and pitched it around to studios and got the same response at Disney and at, Nickelodeon, at, Warner Brothers. This is weird. It's artsy. We don't know what to do with it. So, I got to pass all the way around. So then I put it on the shelf for a couple of years, but, I was still working with ideas. And So there are a lot of different possible ways it could have gone, I think. At one point, Heather Henson and I had taken it to Boom Studio. I think that's the comic book company. I think it was Archaea, which was before Archaea folded and then Boom took over.
Yeah.
It was Sam. I'll just say I remember at the time you telling me it was Archaea. I remember you talking about that meeting with Archaea. So that's just
okay.
But
Okay.
I don't know anything else.
I don't. Archaea.
You are correct.
Yes,
you are correct though. It is Boom.
Yeah, I think Archaea. It was Archaea, and they were handling all the Henson projects like Fraggle Rock, Dark Crystal, all those comics.
Yeah,
that's why we had a connection to them. So we went in and pitched Yamasong and some of the other short films that Heather produced, and they were interested. And then in the end, they eventually came back and said, "No, we're going to just stick with the IP that's Henson stuff that already has a fan base. People already know, Fraggle Rock. They know Dark Crystal. They know Labyrinth. So that conversation only lasted a couple of meetings, but what it did is it jump-started this idea in my head. Well, if I got to do a comic series, what would it be? Where would I take Shojin and Nani? What would we explore in their world? So there are already those ideas kind of floating around in my head by the time, Sultan asked me if I wanted to, take his money and make a film. So, yeah.
And in those discussions, Sam, were discussions you and I had as well, because like I said, the goal of our film festival at that time was to take shorts and make them into comic books. So it was right in line with what we were trying to do. And it was kind of that thing where we had at the time, we were releasing, the plan was, we never truly did it though, to release independently small run, print run of comic books, like of the shorts to kind of showcase them. And then we were going to do that, take that to, we had a deal with IDW at the time. And it was just kind of like not a deal, but like a sort of a friendly agreement where they would take a look at our work and kind of like be that like first look that our filmmakers could pitch to them kind of thing. So, and that never led to anything or panned out, but those were the discussions we had. So it's kind of like interesting just how almost like in some sense, like you're inadvertently like sort of growing a story in different ways.
Yeah.
Not necessarily knowing where it might go, but it's knowing it's going to go somewhere and just kind of exploring these different tracks. And then, so you found out where it went.
Yeah, and actually, we were approached after the Yamasong film came out last year, approached by an independent comic company that was interested in developing a comic series around Yamasong. And we again, the idea started turning and in my head, and we had a lot of different ways we could go with it. But ultimately, in the end, the Dark Dunes, who owns the rights to the feature film, said no to the comic book. Last year, they also said no to the video game, which could have also been cool. But, you develop the ideas and then you kind of put it away. And then when the next conversation happened, you kind of pull out the stuff, dust it off and say, is this stuff still relevant, or am I interested in telling this story, or do I want to do something else now? And the thing about the Yamasong short, though, right now, it's the 10-year anniversary, and we're actually going to be doing an event next month at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., the Smithsonian Asian Art Museum. They're going to do a Yamasong screening, and I'm going to teach a workshop. And so, Yamasong is kind of fresh in my head again, and ideas are starting to come back. And yeah, because and it's all kind of based on that one image, Josiah, of the girl on the bird. Because the puppet workshop I'm leading, we're actually going to make paper versions of the bird and Shojin and Nani that kids can color and then construct and reconstruct that scene if they want to. And so I think there's still plenty of areas to explore. With Dark Dunes, we talked about a sequel. We haven't talked about that for a couple of years now, but I've already got an idea of what the sequel would be. But if I get an opportunity to do something else, like either a comic book or maybe another short, I might go back in and expand the short film and Shojin and Nani's journey, because they could play in that world just with those few characters.
Absolutely. So, talking about expanding and talking about characters and character development and stuff. What is the one thing about actually doing puppets that you think actually has like a gain, as opposed to so many different forms of animation, so many other forms of of using like puppets, dolls, stop motion clay figures and stuff like that. For you, for you as a creator and somebody who loves puppetry, what is the one thing that you think is actually best about actually just utilizing these puppets?
I'd say it's the physicality of them, the reality of the puppets. They're the textures are there, the colors are there. That's all baked in by reality. You don't have to have a lighting artist and a texture artist and a rigger and all of the the CGI characters have so many people attached to bringing one character to life. Where with puppets, it's really you build the puppet and it's the puppeteers who bring it to life under the director's vision, but that's it. And like you said, we can rehearse and rehearse until we get something a certain way, which is an advantage that you don't have with other approaches. Yeah. So I'd say that's it. Really, is the physicality of them. And then I've been in sessions, brainstorming sessions and stuff where when you have the puppet in the room, it's almost like being a kid again. You can pick up the puppet and move it around and go, and then he does this and then he does that, or when I did the voice sessions with all of our actors, I'd bring in the puppet so, George Takei could see his character, or Peter Weller could see their character. And each person, when I bring in the puppet, they just thought they were maquettes that were an example of what their animated character is going to look like. And I was like, no, this is your character right here. And they were always like, wow, this is cool.
Did you record all the dialogue and did you record prior to the puppetry, or did you do production first and then recording?
It was a mix, and that's probably one of the hardest things about production was our schedule was really dependent on the stars' schedules as far as when they could come in and record. So we would record as they became available. We'd go in, we'd have a session, and then we'd cut their stuff into into the overall animatic, and then start to build our schedule for our shoot. So we would shoot for a week on, week off kind of thing, and in between grab Nathan Fillion or grab Whoopi Goldberg, when they're available. So what that caused, the difficult thing it caused for us was sometimes we'd only have one side of a conversation when two characters are talking.
Yeah.
So we'd shoot Nathan Fillion's side, but then we'd flip around for Abigail Breslin. We didn't have it yet, so we couldn't really flip around. So then we had to take really good notes about what our lighting setup was, what we shot, log all of that, and stay on top of all of those details. So when we came back in after we got Abigail Breslin or whoever was opposite of Nathan Fillion's character, know what we shot, review what we shot, and then get the reverse on it.
Yeah.
So
that's
the hardest part.
Absolutely. You're talking about getting the wheels and creative, basically getting the creative juices kind of flowing again, and possibly maybe expanding on the story even more so. Is there anything that you would like to incorporate into whatever the next project might be, this next time around that you weren't able to do, for this film or even for the short?
Oh yeah. I mean, I love what I've seen of behind the scenes of shows like Clone Wars, for example. They would bring all their voice actors into the room at the same time if they can, and get everybody all together, so you have the energy of the actors playing off of each other. I think that would be one big thing that I'd really love to be able to do, or at least do it as much as possible.
Yeah, that's interesting because I would never produce anything near the level of what these are for voiceover, but I used to produce voiceover, and I would have to be the guy reading back because I was actually producing it, I wasn't directing it, and I would be the one reading the dialogue back to the whatever character, and I worked on a lot of like toys brand like web stuff, so I'm the one reading back like their little girlfriend who's like, OMG, can you believe it? And that's getting it from me, and I'm like doing my best, but I am by no means a 12-year-old little girl actor, so it's definitely a different dynamic when you have both of those actors in a room that can then bring that out. I mean, you can see, I think in the film, particularly with Nathan Fillion, like he is so amazingly fantastic that there's a level of humanity to that character that is just, I think, the the deepest in the film. Just he is maybe George Takei, really those two both. It's something with those turtles but he is so good as a voice actor that he could be talking back against someone like me and it doesn't matter. But there might be other people who don't have that dynamic ability. And even when someone's good, I mean, I feel like it makes them better when they can do that. So.
Yeah, so you can imagine then the person that was you in our recording sessions was me. So I was acting opposite of Whoopi Goldberg, or opposite of Nathan Fillion, or opposite of George Takei, and that was really cool. But I'm not a professional voice person, so but they were all able to bounce off of my energy, so that's good. We at least get that. It's not that we're just saying, okay, read your line, now do it again, it was more dynamic than that. But I would love to have the actors, performing to each other and reacting off of each other. I think you'd get another level of performance out of them that way.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But, Nathan Fillion, he's so good. And I've listened, when we were cutting the audio together, I listened to his voice, all of their voices so many times. But the thing about him I found is he has this natural warmth in his voice.
Yeah.
This kind of friendly, disarming, goofy, kind of personality that, you just want to hang out with the guy, So that's what I think,
I agree. I agree 1,000%.
How did you connect with him originally?
What was that?
Well, again, Paul?
So how did you connect with him originally? Like, did you have Nathan Fillion in mind for Shojun, or was he interested in the part and he decided to hop on board? Like, what was that process in casting him?
Let's see. Sultan asked me if I had a wish list, so I gave him my wish list. And Nathan Fillion was on the list for Shojun. He was the first choice. And George Takei was on the list for his father, Masuk. So both of those we got, which was great. The way it worked was Dark Dunes had worked with Malcolm McDowell in their previous film, Kids vs. Monsters. And Malcolm McDowell had worked with them, so they already had his info, and he liked working with them. So they reached out to Malcolm McDowell, and he loved the part for Lord Gear and took it. And then his agent also reps Bruce Davison, who's a wonderful, great indie, film guy. And so we got Malcolm and Bruce right away.
Ending the fact that he was in X-Men 1. I'm just
he's
And Willard
too.
And
Willard also.
And he said, you know what, when we had our last session with him, he said now his career has moved to, he's the voice of Zuko in Legend of Korra.
Yes.
The older Zuko. So, yeah. And he was great. And he's kind of like he's almost like a acting coach. He's so supportive of indie creative stuff. So, yeah, we had Bruce and Malcolm right off the bat. And then my producer went out and reached out, I think it's CAA maybe. I think this is where Nathan Fillion and Frida Pinto are. So just reached out to them and said, hey, we have this film, Heather Henson and Toby Froud, the kids of Jim Henson and Brian Froud, the original creators of Dark Crystal, are now making a movie. And we have Malcolm McDowell and we have Bruce Davison. Don't you want your guy or your gal to be in on it? And so then they went to their people, and Nathan, I think Nathan Fillion said yes pretty quickly. Frida Pinto, yeah, he was great. I think Abigail Breslin was a friend of a friend. So we cast, it took about 2 months to get everybody, and the last one was Whoopi Goldberg. But I don't feel like there was a lot of fight to get them. I think everybody, once they found out about the project and who the talent was involved, kind of jumped on board. So it was like a snowball effect.
That's great.
So Sam, how much time in terms of talking about production, so how much time did you spend, would you say, in the studio with each actor generally, and then overall recording the dialogue, and then plus the production overall? Like, what was just the time frame for? Like, I know you said kind of you did things here and there when you could because of their availability. What in terms of time kind of did you spend on those things?
So each record session was about 2 hours. So, and we had nine voice actors. So most of them were 2 hours. Ed Asner was the shortest. He was under an hour. So, but Whoopi was the longest. I think she was 3. So it was about 18 to 20 hours for all the voice stuff, counting ADR and loop group.
It's not bad.
And then, yeah, it wasn't bad at all. The shoot itself was about 50 days, counting pickups. So that's, maybe a little on the long side, but I wouldn't say it's horrible.
No.
And then post is what took the longest. It took us like a year and a half of post. I think it's like 15, 16 months of just, VFX working on each shot. And, I was working pretty constantly. It wasn't just popping in and giving notes and then leaving when they need me. I was doing, since everything was on green screen or some level of green, I was doing all of the layout, the background layout, just like in animation. So I was laying, I was doing Photoshop comps, sending it over to all of the post people so they know exactly where to put the background plate, and what position, what scale, all of that. So that was a pretty intense, busy time. So, we signed the contract for Yamasong in the summer of 2014, started building puppets in fall of 2014, started shooting or recording audio and shooting January, February of 2015, wrapped shooting, I think, in September 2015. And then we were just in post until mid 2016 or so.
Nice.
Yeah.
Talking about the green screen and everything like that. I mean, what is would you, maybe if you were to continue on, I mean, would you like to use sets and a little bit more, I guess just real, like real places for the puppets as opposed to relying so heavily on VFX?
And just to interject real quick, Sam, then how much would you say was like going off what Tyler was saying, how much would you say was like physically built for the sets versus what was then digitally put in later?
I'd say with 30 to 40% of what we had was real. And it was, like the inside of Lord Gear's cottage, it was a half wall. So the performers performed over a wall.
Yeah.
And then we digitally extended the wall texture that we already had, that we shot in camera, and extended that up to fill the frame. And that worked pretty well. The stuff that got more difficult was when it was just straight green, because you don't know what's there until you start building it. And that, my DP would also, the DP and lighting, everybody, the performers would all say the same kind of thing, which would be, it's so much better when you can see the space you're performing in, what you're performing to, how to light it, how to shoot it. That's why I love like the Mandalorian and what they're doing now with the 360 set and the sky, everything. They're in the world completely. That's definitely the direction I want to go. Would be doing more of that.
And that's the evolution of what Stanley Kubrick was doing, right? With the massive projection that he did in like 2001 and all those things. So it's kind of cool to see how the technology advances, 50 years later to do those things.
Yeah. So, for the scale we work out with Yamasong, the puppets are 18 to 20 inches tall. I know with the right budget, we can get some, pretty large screens and pretty much build our backgrounds, and even if we're still shooting a little bit of green for maybe some of the super wides or whatever, when you're doing a medium or a close up on your character, you can throw a sky in there that's, that's the right lighting temperature, the right temperature, the right color. You can get all that stuff in camera now. So that's definitely one direction I want to go. And I was working on a feature last year with a Chinese company. The feature didn't go, but we did spend about 4 months developing puppets and sets. And the whole idea I had was to do it all practically. So, and I worked out a lot of techniques with that. And that's a direction I definitely want to go, build a full set. And then your characters, any rods they have or puppeteers, we'll just digitally remove them, because it's easier to do kind of the stop motion approach where you shoot a clean plate, bring in your puppets, light, shoot, pull everybody out, shoot a second clean plate, and then VFX can go in. And when they remove the rods, they're basically just erasing the rods, and the holes that are there are the plate that's sitting behind it.
Yeah, it makes sense. You just draw. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So that's definitely the direction that I'd go.
How much creative input would you get? Were you pretty much given full freedom to do what you want, or was there a lot of creative input and collaboration with like the producers and financiers and whatnot?
The producers, I think they were most active in the writing phase. And they came to set and they visited set a few times. And during those times, when we're setting up shots, they'd peek in and go, "So what are you doing here?" And I'd say, "This is what we're doing. What do you think?" And, they're generally pretty good about saying, yeah, go ahead with that. There are a few points in the script phase where we made some changes. And then also in post, once we had our first pass on the full edit, then there was some looking at the edit and going, well, what do we need? Something's not working here. How can we do it? They didn't want to go back and do any reshoots. So at first we were just trying to figure out how we can use what we've already shot to, connect certain shots or moments together. The biggest changes, I think, were in the intro. In the feature, you'll notice there's the whole first 2 or 3 minutes, which gives you the backstory, and it's basically clips of the short, plus a little bit of extra, world building stuff. That's in there because the producers are like, we don't want our audience to be completely lost when you start the story. So we're going to we want you to do narration. We want you to give, stuff from the short so that people know what happened. And I think it works. I've seen some, critical feedback, online things about, well, that first part, they're just throwing a bunch of stuff at us that, you don't need to know. If you want to just start after 5 minutes or whatever, you can pick up the story from there. But other people feel like it was absolutely necessary. So, it works. The original film starts with the attack on the village. That's how it was originally written. So out of nowhere, these, the soot storms come from the sky. You'll see the tricksters. The soot comes from the sky, attacks the village. Everyone's in danger. They hide, and then we go to Shojin in the snow, which is where we're picking him up from at the end from the short film. So that was the original beginning. So that had to be rewritten, and we brought Bruce Davison back in to do narration.
Okay, so there was never then that intention, at least initially, before in your script, the version of the script that you put down when shooting, it just started at that point with the village, and then it was once you had your final sort of edit, then you decided to then pull from the short?
Yeah, to build like a bit of the narrative. We pulled that intro piece in the beginning. It's like 2 or 3 minutes, is half clips from the short, basically highlights from the short, and then the older backstory of where Pitor, he came to the world. He came with his hollows. They met the Obus. They started to convert them into machines. And then he punished them and put them in the prison. That was all new stuff that we shot. But the Shojin Nani journey was straight from the short.
Yeah, look, I mean, watching it, I was like, I knew that from the short. And I'm sure that Paul and Tyler watching it just literally probably back to back. Here's the short, here's the feature. It's like, oh, that's the same thing. And it's kind of cool. One thing that mentioned, if you have Amazon Prime, you can watch this on Amazon Prime. So check it out. Yeah. Anyone listening if you have it, a lot of people have Amazon Prime because of the state of the world right now that you can actually kind of get stuff. So I ordered a dog collar for my dog. My dog collar is broken, and it kind of sort of works, but it's not supposed to come until May 15th because it's not an essential item. So I guess I have to go out and get a dog collar. But anyway, you can right now. You might have to wait for your dog collars, but you do not have to wait to watch Yama-san to understand the context of what we're talking about with the film. So sort of whether it be Yama-san or what's your next project, Sam? What's kind of in the pipeline for you?
Well, I told you, I'll plug it here. I'm writing a sci-fi story right now, and it's kind of going back to my book illustration roots that I started in art school. That's what I was originally studying to do, is book illustration. So I'm writing I basically challenged myself to write a 9-week story. So it's a sci-fi short, and it's about a character on a world that's, they basically lived underground because their world's been devastated, and she emerges from the world on a mission to take her mom's remains to their original homeworld. So she has to figure out how to get off her planet, which has no technology now, and then move, across the solar system to the planet where her mom's supposed to be buried. And she comes across two junk collectors who happen to have crashed on the planet, and she convinces them to take her to her homeworld. and then they encounter all these kind of adventures along the way from that point to the end of the story. So it's going to be 18 illustrations, probably 30-page short story. And I'm putting out WordPress right now. So if you go to mightypug.wordpress.com, you'll be able to read. I think I put up 5 parts so far. I call them chapters. They're not really chapters. They're more like one or 2 page bits. But so I'm getting back to kind of illustration, telling a story, and eventually, maybe this will be another film project. We'll see. So that's the big one. I also produce for Heather Henson now, so I'm producing short films for her. So we have some short films in the works, and I'm still out there pitching. I'm having conversations with a couple of the studios about possible projects too.
That's awesome. And just going back slightly to the Heather Henson, also available on Amazon Prime. A lot of the short films that Heather brought into my film festival when we did a screening, it's called Handmade Puppet Dreams. Which she kind of curates. Some of them she produces. If she doesn't produce them, she curates them and brings them together. A lot of that stuff is on Prime. Earlier Sam mentioned, I think, Moon Fishing, which is really fantastic, which is one that's on there. It's kind of cool. Like, I haven't revisited these films in years, but thinking about them, and when you look on Amazon Prime and you search Yamasan, some of the other ones come up, and it's just kind of like sparking the memories of the event screenings that we did and some of these films that I hadn't seen in several years that are just really fantastic short films. And there's a lot of that content that it's so crazy how the world has changed, Sam, from when I was doing the film festival and we were doing these events with you. And now with the digital, like, streaming was a thing then, but it wasn't like it is now where it's just at your fingertips. It's just kind of an amazing, the progression, and here we are. And particularly the age where everyone is essentially, sheltering at home, in quarantine, in lockdown, whatever you want to call it. So you have some really, really fantastic puppet films to watch while you're at home, beyond just Sam's, and some that Sam produced. Can you quickly talk about some of the ones that you have produced? Like, you mentioned Toby Froud's film, some of the other things that you've produced with Heather?
Yeah, so Toby Froud is Brian and Wendy Froud's son. The Frouds are the ones who designed, the Dark Crystal and Labyrinth worlds. Brian Froud's a famous sci-fi or fantasy illustrator, and Toby's their son. He was baby Toby in Labyrinth, so he's always been part of the creative kind of lifeblood of these kind of fantasy worlds. And then for the new Henson Dark Crystal series, Toby was one of their main creative directors. So he's gone from being the baby in Labyrinth to now fully working as creative in his own right. And so I met him and worked with him on his first short film, which is called Lessons Learned. And if you go to Amazon Prime and look up Lessons Learned, you'll see it's a very, what he calls a Froudian world with kind of goblin type characters on an adventure. A little boy getting lost in his grandfather's kind of chest of dreams, which is a really, really fun project to work on. So that's when I met Toby. And then when Yamasan came up, I went to Toby and asked him if he wanted to be a producer. And he was great. I'll tell you a little story about that really quick, just a little side story. Toby wanted to see the script when we were developing it. So I sent him the script, and he, looked at it, and he gave notes, and he emailed notes to Dark Dunes, to the producers. And they really thought it was some person spamming them saying that it was, that it was Toby, and it wasn't really Toby. So my producer came to me one day and said, Sam, someone's trying to get us to change the script, and they're saying they're Toby. And I was like, I actually think it is Toby. And like, no, Toby wouldn't do that. I was like, yeah, actually, Toby was giving notes, and they were all good. They're great notes. He's a great story guy, great visual guy. He's top notch. He worked at Leica for years, and now he's over working on Pinocchio, the new Guillermo del Toro stop motion film. So he's a great guy. So Toby did Lessons Learned, and I was his producer for that. And then also look for Narrative of Victor Carlock. It's kind of a mouthful, but that's directed by Kevin McTurk, who's gone on to do some great kind of horror adventure stories. Very kind of shot dark and moody. He did one called Mill at Calder's End, and the new one, it's called the Haunted Samurai, Blind Samurai. No, something Samurai, Haunted Samurai.
Now you're
Anyway.
making me forget, Sam. Yeah, something Sam and I
Go for
think the haunted swordsman. The haunted swordsman.
Haunted Swordsman, that's what it
Yes.
is. Yeah. So that one just came out this year. It was playing the film festivals. And then look for Legend of Rasputin, which is a newer one. That one I produced, and that's with Jamie Shannon, who's in Canada. Jamie's known for a show in Canada called Nanoland, which was kind of their Sesame Street. And on Nickelodeon, there's a show called Mr. Meaty, which is kind of a puppet Beavis and Butthead kind of show where they worked at a hot dog stand. So Rasputin is more of a dark, comedy. Everything's tongue in cheek and is about Rasputin, the famous Russian mystic who, was tied in with the Romanov dynasty and all of that. So check those out. And if you look up Handmade Puppet Dreams on Amazon, all of them will come up. There's 16 films up there.
Yeah, it's a lot of great stuff. There's some really, really fantastic short films. So do you have any final questions or thoughts for Sam, guys?
Yeah, I was wondering, as far as the art of puppetry, where do you see it moving forward from here? Or where do you see it advancing in the future?
Well, there's always like digital puppetry, which is, I think there are a lot of people trying out and testing things. I think there'll be some overlap between puppetry and motion capture in that respect. I'm even developing with a artist in Norway a facial motion capture system for puppets. So it'd be kind of like, performed faces, but the puppet bodies are still performed live by puppeteers. Experiments like that. I think there's going to be a lot of hybrid stuff happening, kind of like Baby Yoda. Yoda's a lot of live performance, but I hear there's a lot of digital enhancement on Baby Yoda in post. So I think that's the way it'll go. And then I think they're also going to be the stalwarts who are going to be like, puppets have to be 100% live. Don't ever mess with them. Who are going to want to shoot everything live and real and not get into the manipulation in post. So, yeah.
Nice.
And then there's the big giant stuff like King Kong on Broadway or, Walking with Dinosaurs doing giant puppets. That'll be cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I know a dancer in King Kong. Actually, she a friend, like a close friend's ex-girlfriend. She's in that show. So she was also in the Spider-Man one. So she's in like the very few handful of Broadway shows that I would actually probably want to see. So
yeah.
Why did he break up with her? I could have gotten to see these shows. What was up with that?
I don't know. You could have seen Turn Off the Dark.
There's no way that you can get me into Turn Off the Dark. There's no way. I don't want to see a dead body. I'm good.
Is Turn Off the Dark? That's still...
King Kong. We want to see King Kong. Though. I really want to see that one. I legitimately would want to see that.
No, Turn Off the Dark was an absolute disaster. Lost a lot of money. It closed down within a year, if I remember correctly.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So. I mean, it closed down pretty quick, I think. It
did, yeah. She was not on that show for long.
Alrighty.
Which is too bad. I mean, Julie Taymor was the director, and she's done some amazing work over the years. She's controversial too, like Spider-Man, but yeah, she's one of those amazing. She started, I think, doing puppets first. Like Balinese puppets and puppet theater and Shakespeare, and then branched out and started doing live action. Across the universe was no puppets except for I think the little segment on the protest puppets. Is mostly live action actors. Yeah. So she's one of those few directors, I think, who've gone, all the way across the gamut from theater puppets all the way to full feature films. One thing I will say, I've found even watching Dark Crystal and prep for this, it's almost easier to take little bites of it, instead of sitting and watching the whole thing at once. The best viewing experience I had of Yamasong was showing Heather Henson, giving her a private screening. And we probably watched it 20, 30 minutes at a time, took a break, ordered pizza, sat back down, watched some more. Then when food came, stopped, took a break, talked about it, then sat down, watched some more. I almost want to break it into chapters. I've talked to the producers about maybe re-releasing it down the line and doing it more like a 5-episode kind of thing.
Yeah, miniseries. Yeah.
Very interesting.
You know what? I do have one more question. When I first saw it, it kind of reminded me a little bit of like Brothers Quay. Was that an influence on you? The Brothers Quay?
Not so much Brothers Quay. I mean, I'm coming more from the Dark Crystals kind of angle. Dark Crystal, and then like Hayao Miyazaki, like the Princess Mononoke, Spirited Away kind of aesthetic, that Japanese fantasy kind of anime kind of aesthetic, and then Jack Kirby, comic books. Those are the biggest influences. But I think probably when you see it and you see Brothers Quay, it might be because you're also seeing, again, real objects, real textures, and it's, some of the creatures are darker and creepier than some of the others, So there's probably that.
I really got that vibe when I was watching it, is of Brothers Quay.
No, that's cool. I like their stuff. Definitely.
Yeah, no, they're great.
Sam, thank you so much for being here. Once again, Yamasong, available both the short and the full-length feature on Amazon Prime. And thank you so much for talking with us today. And yeah, hopefully we'll look out for some more Yamasong verse, in the near future.
I'd love it. Yeah, thanks.
And thank you, listeners, for listening in. You can check out all of our shows and offerings on thegrandgeekgathering.com. All of our podcasts are available on Spotify, on Google Podcasts, on Apple Podcasts, on Stitcher, on everything. And if you can't find us, please let us know. And don't forget to also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I've been streaming on Twitch, and we also have our Let's Plays on YouTube as well. Once again, Yamasong, both the short and the full-length feature, are available on Amazon Prime for free. So go ahead and watch it. It's a lot of fun and some awesome puppetry. Just be safe, wash your hands, care about your loved ones, but don't touch them.
That's the approach I take with my daughters.
Somebody should make like a hamster bubble or something and, roll around.
To my 6-month-old, I say, change your own diaper, kid.
I feel like
I can't touch you.
I feel like we need to watch Bubble Boy now. Have a great week, and GGG.
What's on the silver screen? I got some takes you wouldn't believe. Moses, Grand